When the Western world looks at Venezuela, it typically sees a tragedy. The narrative is familiar, almost cliché. We see hyperinflation, political gridlock, and humanitarian distress. It is a story of failure. But if we strip away the moral lens, ignore the political headlines, and look exclusively at the systemic data, a completely different picture emerges. Venezuela is not merely a crisis state. In the context of modern financial history, it is serving a much more critical, albeit quieter, function. It is a living laboratory. We are witnessing a structural evolution. For the first time in the modern era, a nation-state that has been aggressively severed from the global operating system is not dying, it is mutating. Venezuela has become the test subject for a new kind of economic architecture. It is the beta version of a future that many sanctioned nations are racing to build. Think about the implications of that statement. When a country is cut off from the SWIFT messaging system, when its foreign reserves are frozen, and when its primary export is placed under total embargo, the economic textbook says the system should collapse. But here, the data shows adaptation. From the extra-heavy oil fields of the Orinoco Belt to the ghost ships running dark operations in the South China Sea, and finally to the digital USDT wallets in Dubai, Venezuela has constructed entirely new financial and logistical rails. This is the birth of the gray zone economy. In this briefing, we will decode the mechanism of this machine. We are not interested in the politics of the regime. We are interested in the physics of the trade. We will analyze the geological constraints of heavy oil, the maritime logistics of the dark fleet, and finally, the systemic USDTization of sovereign capital. And most importantly, we will answer a question that impacts every wallet in the Western world. Why have these sanctions unintentionally created a massive subsidy for America's strategic rivals? And why does inflation in the United States actually begin in the abandoned oil fields of South America? Welcome to The Autopsy, the financial architecture of resistance. To understand the money, first, you must understand the physics. The financial flows of this region are dictated not by politicians, but by geological reality. Venezuela's position in the global order starts with a single staggering statistic: 303 billion barrels. This is the largest proven oil reserve in the world. It exceeds Saudi Arabia's 267 billion barrels. It exceeds Iran's 209 billion barrels. Theoretically, Venezuela holds the ultimate collateral, the world's largest energy savings account. But in energy markets, reserves are a meaningless metric without convertibility. A barrel of oil in the ground is not an asset, it is merely geology. It only becomes an asset when it can be extracted and sold. And this is where Venezuela falls into a geological trap. The oil found in the Orinoco Belt is not the light, easy-flowing liquid gold you see in movies. It is extra-heavy crude. It is dense, viscous, and laden with sulfur and heavy metals. It is so thick that at room temperature it does not flow. To transport this substance through a pipeline, you cannot simply pump it. You are forced to dilute it with special solvents, diluents, like naphtha, to reduce its viscosity. Western sanctions targeted this exact technical bottleneck. By banning the export of diluents to Venezuela, the U.S. effectively froze the oil in the pipes. The result was catastrophic for production. Output collapsed to just 1 million barrels per day, creating a stranded asset scenario where the country has enough oil to last 885 years but cannot bring it to surface. However, this policy created a systemic blind spot that few policymakers fully appreciated: America's own reverse dependency. For decades, the global energy map was interconnected. The refining system on the U.S. Gulf Coast, PADD3, the industrial heart of American energy, was designed and optimized specifically to digest this heavy crude. Refining is not a generic process. You cannot put any oil into any factory. US refineries invested billions of dollars into complex coking units designed to break down the heavy hydrocarbon chains found in Venezuelan oil. And here is the irony of the shale revolution. The United States now produces massive amounts of oil, but it is light, sweet crude. Chemically, this is a mismatch. You cannot simply feed light shale oil into a coker designed for heavy sludge without severely reducing efficiency and potentially damaging the equipment. When the supply from Venezuela was severed, US refineries were starved of their optimal feedstock. They were forced to scramble, sourcing heavy crude replacements from Canada or the Middle East, often at significantly higher transportation costs. The consequence of this mismatch is financial. Refinery crack spreads, the profit margin for turning crude into fuel, were compressed. The cost of producing diesel, the primary fuel for trucks, trains, and farm machinery, came under upward pressure. And when the price of diesel rises, the transportation cost of every physical good in the U.S. economy rises with it. This is a masterclass in systems thinking. You can sanction a political regime, but you cannot sanction the laws of chemistry. Removing Venezuelan oil from the supply chain didn't just isolate Venezuela, it created a silent supply-side shock inside the U.S. manufacturing base. But if this oil is not flowing to Houston, where is it going? It hasn't disappeared, it has simply entered the shadows. When the official channels close, the trade does not stop. It simply migrates. To move millions of barrels of sanctioned oil, Venezuela relies on a decentralized, opaque logistics network known as the dark fleet or shadow fleet. This is not merely smuggling on a small scale. This is the industrial-scale restructuring of global maritime logistics. To understand how a gray zone economy functions physically, we must break down the life cycle of a dark voyage. It begins with the asset. The ships in this fleet are typically end-of-life vessels, very large crude carriers or Suezmax tankers that are over 15 years old. In a normal market, these ships would be sent to the scrapyard due to safety regulations. Instead, they are purchased by shell companies registered in loose jurisdictions, often for cash, to separate them from legitimate corporate structures. Once the ship is acquired, it enters the cloak. The primary mechanism of evasion is the manipulation of the Automatic Identification System, or AIS. Before entering the Venezuelan Exclusive Economic Zone, these tankers go dark. They switch off their transponders, disappearing from civilian tracking radars. But invisibility is not enough. They also employ flag hopping. A ship might fly the flag of St. Kitts one week and Cameroon the next, constantly changing its registration and name to outpace regulatory blacklists. The most critical phase is the handover. Direct shipments from Venezuela to China are too easy to track. Instead, the dark fleet utilizes ship-to-ship transfers. The crude is loaded onto a shuttle tanker in Venezuela. This tanker travels to international waters, often off the coast of Malaysia or West Africa, and meets a larger mothership. In the middle of the open ocean, often in poor weather conditions, they transfer the crude. This breaks the chain of custody. The oil on the second ship no longer technically originates from a Venezuelan port. To further obscure the trail, the cargo undergoes rebranding. By the time the oil reaches the customs books in China, it is no longer listed as Venezuelan Mary Crude. It is relabeled as bitumen mix or Malaysian blend. This alteration of HS codes allows the buyer to claim ignorance and bypass import quotas or compliance checks. However, this shadow logistics system introduces a massive unpriced risk to the world: the insurance cliff. In the white market, 90% of global shipping is insured by the international group IG in London. These insurers guarantee that if a spill occurs, billions of dollars are available for cleanup. But sanctions prohibit IG members from covering these dark vessels. Consequently, the dark fleet relies on Tier 2 insurers. These are often obscure entities based in Russia or the Middle East with opaque capitalization. The systemic risk here is terrifying. We have rusting, 20-year-old tankers turning off their radars to avoid detection, performing risky ship-to-ship transfers in a high seas, insured by companies that may not have the solvency to pay for a disaster. This is the hidden cost of fragmentation. We have eroded the global maritime safety standards built over decades, replacing them with a deregulated, high-risk shadow network. But moving the physical oil is only half the battle. The harder part is moving the money. If the dark fleet is the hardware of this shadow economy, then we need to analyze the software. How do you settle billions of dollars in trade when every major bank in New York, London, and Frankfurt is legally obligated to freeze your funds the moment they touch the wire? You do not try to trick the banking system. You exit the banking system entirely. You enter the blockchain. According to recent financial intelligence and investigative data, a staggering structural shift has occurred in Caracas. As of 2024, an estimated 80% of Venezuela's oil revenue is settled not in dollars, not in euros, and not in bolivars, but in USDT, Tether. This is not a niche experiment by a few tech-savvy traders. This is the first time in modern economic history that a petrostate has effectively USDTized its national cash flow. We must understand this mechanism as a shadow SWIFT. The system operates on a closed-loop architecture designed to be invisible to the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. Here is the operational protocol. To mitigate the extreme risk of non-payment, PDVSA, the state oil company, now demands a prepayment of at least 50% of the cargo value before the ship is even allowed to leave the port. In the traditional world, this would require a letter of credit from a bank, a document impossible to get under sanctions. In the shadow economy, the buyer simply transfers USDT to a digital wallet controlled by an intermediary. The transaction settles on the Tron or Ethereum blockchain. Compare this to SWIFT. SWIFT takes days, T+2 or T+3, requires correspondent banks in New York, subject to U.S. jurisdiction. USDT settlement is instant, T+0, peer-to-peer, and bypasses the U.S. banking messaging system entirely. Once the USDT lands in the intermediary's wallet, it enters the final phase, liquidity transformation. The USDT is not held forever. It is used directly to pay for imports, or it is sold on over-the-counter markets in friendly jurisdictions like Dubai or Hong Kong to convert back into hard currency.
However, this system contains a massive systemic irony that we must highlight. While Venezuela has successfully escaped the control of the U.S. Federal Reserve, it has walked straight into the jurisdiction of a private corporation, Tether. Tether is not a decentralized protocol like Bitcoin. It is a centralized company. They possess a kill switch, the ability to freeze tokens at the smart contract level. Data shows that Tether has already frozen 41 wallets linked to sanctioned Venezuelan activities. This reveals the extreme fragility of this resistance architecture. Venezuela has not found true financial sovereignty. They have simply swapped a sovereign master, the U.S. government, for a corporate master, Tether. Furthermore, accumulating massive amounts of digital tokens creates a liquidity trap. You can hold billions in USDT, but off-ramping that amount into fiat currency to pay for infrastructure or wages without alerting global authorities is a logistical nightmare. To hedge against this new corporate risk, Venezuela is forced to diversify into the oldest asset of all, physical gold. Like Russia and China, Venezuela is shifting reserves into repatriated physical gold. Why? Because gold sitting in a vault in Caracas has zero counterparty risk. You do not need a bank's permission to hold it. You do not need a blockchain company to validate it. It is the ultimate hedge against both the Fed and Tether. Looking further ahead, the endgame is not USDT. The endgame is mBridge. This is the Bank for International Settlements project connecting the digital currencies of China, UAE, and Thailand. If mBridge succeeds in creating a peer-to-peer rail for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, the need for USDT and the need for the US dollar system entirely evaporates. We are witnessing the beta testing of a post-dollar clearing system funded in real time by sanctioned oil money.
Now, we must ask the question that hits your wallet directly. What is the cost of this shadow system to the rest of the world? In systems thinking, this is called a second-order effect. The sanctions were designed to starve the Venezuelan regime, but in a complex global system, the feedback loop has traveled back to hit the United States economy. Impact 1. The U.S. inflation own goal. Remember the Gulf Coast refineries we discussed in Part 1? They are starved of heavy crude. This shortage forces them to run at lower efficiency or buy expensive substitutes. This structural inefficiency puts upward pressure on the price of diesel. And since everything you buy, from your groceries to your Amazon packages, is transported by a diesel truck or train, high diesel prices bleed into core inflation. The U.S. Federal Reserve is fighting inflation with interest rates, while U.S. foreign policy is arguably fueling inflation by breaking the heavy oil supply chain. It is a policy contradiction. Impact 2. The China subsidy. On the other side of the world, the effect is the opposite. Because Venezuelan oil is toxic to Western buyers, it must be sold at a deep discount, often $15 to $20 below market price, to the only buyer left, China. Think about the math of this transfer. Independent teapot refineries in Shandong are buying energy significantly cheaper than their global competitors. This lowers the cost of production for Chinese petrochemicals and industrial goods. In essence, Western sanctions are providing a massive indirect subsidy to the Chinese manufacturing sector. Venezuela is not just a story about a failed state. It is a blueprint. It is a case study in resistance economics. What we are observing is the great bifurcation of the global economy. On one side, we have the white market, transparent, dollar-based, insured by London and compliant with Western rules. On the other side, we have the gray market, opaque, crypto-settled, insured by shadow entities and fueled by discounted commodities. The system built in Caracas is messy, it is inefficient, it is high risk, but the data proves one undeniable fact: it works. The flow of capital has not stopped, it has simply gone underground. This is not a temporary anomaly, this is a structural divergence. As sanctions become the primary tool of modern statecraft, the incentive to build these parallel systems only increases. Venezuela was the early adopter, but others will follow. We're moving away from a unified global marketplace into an era of fragmented liquidity, where the rules of the game and the value of your money depend entirely on which side of the sanction wall you are standing on.